Go for it.
Yeah, we want to welcome Alice Fontier back, Managing Director of the Neighborhood Defenders Service of Harlem. And as Rashad mentioned, we just spoke with her earlier this morning for an upcoming podcast episode. Alice, thank you so much for joining us again.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me back. And before we get into the topic that I was planning to talk about tonight, I just want to say, Rashad, thank you for bringing up the COVID vaccines for incarcerated people. And I want to give a quick shout out to my office. Megna Phillip, Libby Fisher, and Emily Ponder, attorneys in our office, were lead counsel on the lawsuit that resulted in that decision. And incredible work by all of them that is really making a difference. I saw already today, I got an email saying that at least the Nassau jail had announced that they were bringing in Johnson & Johnson vaccines and offering them to everyone. So huge victory that was way too late in coming, but really incredible work by people in my office. So I want to, give them a shout while I can.
Definitely, much deserved.
If you allow me, as serious as that is, this is how we do around here. So we will take that.
I think that news warrants one of those. Usually we just
yeah, I think so too. I need to get one of those for like staff meetings and blast that out.
We'll talk after. I got you.
All right.
Yeah. So Alice, the legalization of marijuana in New York, and obviously we know that marijuana arrests and drug offenses in general by the NYPD have targeted African Americans and Hispanic communities of color. To just, incredible stats when you look at it. I think last year was 93% compared to white counterparts, which were 5%, despite similar marijuana use rates. And the first thing that came to me when I heard this was, what the hell is going to happen to all those, tens of thousands of people over the years who've been locked up or who have criminal records or both, because of being arrested for marijuana. Your thoughts on that?
So tens of thousands is a wild understatement. It's actually hundreds of thousands. From 1996 until now, for just misdemeanor marijuana possession, over 800,000 New Yorkers have been prosecuted and convicted. So it is an enormous number that we're talking about. And as you mentioned, the vast majority of those people are Black and Latinx folks. So there is, a huge population of people that have been impacted by the over-policing of marijuana prohibition. And what happens is now, by virtue of this law, effective today, the governor signed it. I need another horn shout for that getting signed. The records of people who are currently serving sentences are to be automatically reviewed, vacated, expunged if they are not a crime at all now, or reduced to whatever the crime might be now under the current penal code. For people that are not currently serving a sentence, so prior convictions, they have to file a petition, but it is automatic. There's not something that will deny them. I think it's really just about the resources of, so that a million cases didn't fall onto the court's lap to have to deal with tomorrow. The petitions will have to get filed, and then they will be handled as the petitions come in. But those convictions are getting vacated and expunged, which will make a huge difference to people in terms of ability to get housing, school loans, jobs, keep their families together, immigration consequences, like you name it. This law is a sea change for literally hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers.
And Alice, one of the sticking points, I think, in this legislation compared to previous years has been, where is the tax revenue going to go? How is that going to be allocated? Previously, I know Governor Cuomo wanted to hold on to that money and I guess use it in his general fund. But now I think 40% of it is going to be directed to the communities that have been disproportionately, as Chris documented, impacted by the war on drugs. So can you talk about the significance of that?
Yeah, again, the significance is monumental. It's huge. And, this particular legislation, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, in almost the exact form which actually got passed this year, has been introduced into the legislation into the legislature for a few years running and had the votes to pass in both the Assembly and the House last year, the year before. But there was the fight with Governor Cuomo about where the money would go. And if you compare what actually got passed and signed today to what Governor Cuomo put into his budget again this year, the big difference, there's some penal law differences too, but the big difference is where the money goes. And, it is no small amount of money. The estimates right now are that when this industry is up and fully running in New York State, the entire industry will be about a $4.2 billion annual industry. And the taxation to just the state, never mind cities and other municipalities, will be about $350 million a year. So it's a lot of money that we're talking about. And the governor wanted all of that originally to go into a general fund that he effectively controlled. And again, thanks to the bill sponsors and others in the Assembly and the Senate, Senator Kruger, and in the Assembly, Assembly member Crystal Peoples-Stokes, they held tight and said, no, this money needs to go to the people who have been directly impacted. We need to reinvest into the communities that have been so unbelievably harmed over the last 100 years of prohibition. And if you can't change this and not specifically help those communities. And that's what this bill does.
And Alice, in the larger context of the failed war on drugs, the racist war on drugs, how would you describe this movement, I guess, by states to decriminalize lower level drugs? And really, I know we're talking about a lot of money here, but is it really, could an amount ever really be enough? I mean, as you said, how do you quantify some of that damage,
I don't think you can. For the people who have been deported because of, these offenses, they're not coming back here. They're not going to be with their families again. For the people who spent years in jails, for people who have been denied access to education because they couldn't get loans, denied housing, there's no amount of money that fixes that. For families that have been separated, and, that is, I'm not being hyperbolic when I say families are separated. Marijuana has been used by children's services and family court judges to keep children and parents apart for decades and decades. And that has to end. It is ending now. They're no longer, the statute specifically says that cannot happen. Marijuana use will not be a reason to separate kids from their parents. Those things can never be repaired, and you can't fix a community that has been taken apart literally by deportation, arrest, whatever other forms that the legal system takes to impact people. So you can't fix that, but you also don't need to make it worse. This doesn't have to, what we will have seen in other states that don't have similar provisions is that, there are large companies and sort of conglomerates that know how to navigate the sort of regulatory system, get into the, market first and reap all the profit without having any beneficial impact on the communities that they're in. And the aim of this legislation is to prevent that from happening.
And Alice, you said something that I think is important. I think it's something that people don't really know. And you called this 100 years of prohibition, because a lot of people think of the war on drugs as something that happened in the 60s and 70s with Nixon and Reagan, but it started long before that. So can you just talk about, sort of what this means in the historical context of the war on drugs and just how long this war has been going on for?
But Yeah, and I don't want to, I'm going to speak kind of generally because I am not the expert on the history of drug policy. But the simple overview of marijuana prohibition is that, it was about 100 years ago when they started prohibiting it in various places, basically because they believed that Mexican immigrants were smoking. And before that, it was called cannabis. Marijuana is actually a bit of a derogatory term. It made it sound more Latin, more, and tied it to, Mexican and other Central American immigrants that were, to be, held down, not part of the white supremacist order, quite frankly. And that history of tying drugs of any kind to a class or group of people, and then by that saying they're also criminals, is the war on drugs. It ties people in, even though it's not necessarily true. Like you see, like you started out this by saying that the arrests of for marijuana of Black and brown people are 90+%, but the usage for Black and white folk and Black, Latin, and white is all similar. There's not differences in usage. There's only differences in arrest and prosecution. But if you can tie a drug to a race to crime and link those together, the war on drugs then becomes a war on crime, a war on, against the disorder and the maintaining safety and the order that the police and the system is interested in maintaining.
Great point. And Alice, what is your organization going to be doing to I guess ensure that the public consumption still won't be criminal, even though that they're saying they're not going to do it, and maybe used as a proxy to question people or as leverage?
Yeah, so another really big, it feels small, but in terms of the impact, one of the things that we advocated strongly for that is included in this bill that is not in a lot of the other legalization bills, it relates to the smell of marijuana. So it specifically says in this legislation that the smell of marijuana is not reasonable suspicion. It's not probable cause. You cannot, if you smell marijuana, it is not a reason to stop somebody, search them, question them. And that's incredibly important because, particularly with the proliferation of body cams, the smell of marijuana has been in countless complaints as the reason that the police approached, questioned, stopped somebody. They can't do that anymore. It specifically says no. And so, what my organization and all of the other, defenders in the state will be doing is making sure that that's not something that they're doing, that it's not in a complaint. And if it is, we will gather that information. We will challenge it in individual cases. We will challenge it in, large scale, litigation if we have to. But that was something that we thought really deeply about when advocating for this bill.
And now it's just the last thing from me. And are there any estimates or of just how many less people we're going to be seeing arrested, end up going to courts because of this law that was just passed?
There are estimates, and I apologize, I don't have the number in front of me right now, but it's tens of thousands of people across the state. Wow. That are will not be. And it's also what is like, and that's if you pull the data on just marijuana, but marijuana used as an excuse to search. I think the numbers are going to be really incredibly large. Like, this is a sea change. This is a really important, huge bill that got passed. And, it took years and years of a lot of advocates on the ground working to make this happen, voices of impacted people being raised over and over. And, that this finally got done has been a lot of cause for celebration among a lot of people today. And I do think that, we are going to see a very, very real